Good evening to Environmental Coffee House. I am Sandy Shellis, and with me tonight is Nicholas Humphrey. And I am super excited because this is a chance to really get to know and understand a meteorologist's brain. And he's really interesting. So we're going to build an audience up, and so we get some people joining us. Welcome.
Thank you.
I would love to ask you the first question, not to get in too much until we get a little bit of an audience, because I would really love to have a great interactive discussion here.
Okay.
Just give us a little bit about who you are, although I put it all in the preamble to the live stream. Tell us about you, Nicholas.
Yeah. I'm trained as a meteorologist. I live here in Lincoln, Nebraska. I originally from Seattle, Washington. I was born and raised there. Came to Lincoln in 2008 to attend the University of Nebraska-Lincoln in meteorology and climatology, and I ultimately graduated with my bachelor's in interdisciplinary studies from South Dakota State University in Brookings, South Dakota in 2013. I had an interest in meteorology, but also the social science side. For interdisciplinary studies, you get to learn more about how to take multiple different fields to understand a complex problem. So in my case, I did an interdisciplinary thesis on tornado warnings and how humans understand, interpret, and react to tornado warnings and their decision making. So I did that. And then I wanted to pursue more in the meteorology and forecasting side, in case I wanted to actually do a career in that. So I did mostly online, program through Mississippi State University, and I graduated with my Master's of Science in meteorology, Applied Meteorology, from that university in 2016. I did my research. It was non-thesis research, but I did a sort of a limited research project in tropical cyclones and their damage potential based on the cyclone size. Looked at tropical systems such as Hurricane Katrina and other systems that hit the Gulf Coast of the United States, and comparing their sizes and their wind fields and relative to the damage that they produce based on their winds, storm surge, and other wind-driven impacts on the coastlines. So I did that, and besides my education, I've done other things. I've been involved a lot in the American Meteorological Society, where I'm an active member. I've gone to annual conferences there in Seattle and New Orleans, Louisiana. New Orleans was really interesting. I went there in 2012, saw how depopulated the city was, but very quiet in downtown New Orleans, compared to what I would expect for such a big city.
I was there pre-hurricane. I went to a conference, but it was a payroll conference pre-hurricane.
Yeah.
And then what I saw and what you saw obviously is a whole different beast.
Yeah. Well, I actually, I went to the convention center, which was one of the areas where there was a lot of carnage during the 2005 storm, and driving back on the interstate to the airport, you could actually see the water line where the water had been when it had flooded that area on the interstate. I've been involved in conferences. I do. I actually did a lot of storm chasing here on the plains, because I wanted to be involved in actually using my knowledge and learning how to learn how to sort of get a lot of experience with the weather here. Because when I lived in Seattle, we don't get a lot of severe storms, a lot of hail or wind, certainly not a lot of tornadoes or anything like that. So going here to Nebraska, South Dakota, you get to actually go out and see these huge storms, these huge convective storms, and not only go and see them, but actually practice forecasting for the events, and then actually seeing them in real time, going out and actually seeing how they develop. And that's a really big experience, not only for yourself, but then you learn something and then you pass that down to new meteorology majors that come into the program. And we eventually, me and other undergraduate and graduate students, helped develop a storm chase team with on the mostly of us UNL students, and that chase team still exists, which is really cool.
That's way cool.
Yeah.
I have never ever met a storm chaser. You got a little story? Do you have any like one really poignant story or scary story or something?
Yeah. In 2014, actually, the last year I chased regularly, we did a chase on Mother's Day in 2014. In May of 2014, we chased a supercell thunderstorm. Supercell is a violently rotating thunderstorm, and it moved from central Nebraska along Interstate 80 towards Lincoln and Omaha, Nebraska, and eastern Nebraska. Yeah. And it was a long-lived, what they call a HP, high precipitation supercell. So it produces a lot of rainfall around the rotating updraft. So if there's a tornado on the ground, it's difficult to see because of all the rainfall. The problem with this storm is that it was also rapid cycling. So it produces a tornado dies, then it produces another one, then it dies. And it's hard to predict when that will happen again and again, but it's rapidly cycling. And we were chasing this storm, even though it was very full of precipitation. And we got stuck on one of these country roads with a lot of gravel, and it was very wet. And we thought we saw a new tornado trying to develop in one part of the storm. And it was a bit of an optical illusion. There was something there that wasn't actually there. And that happens a lot where there's this bad contrast out in the open field. And I looked in another direction, and it was actually a circulation trying to form in a cloud that was trying to come down the road that we were trying to take.
Wow. I guess
we basically got too close to the storm, and then the storm was trying to intercept the road that we needed to go back on. So we had to get back on the road, and we had to basically go underneath the circulation, and the circulation was dumping its pouring rain around itself and on top of us. So, and the new tornado formation was probably imminent at that point. We had to go on that road and then get off of it to get on another road to get away from the storm. And it was like three of us cars too. So I was like on a walkie looking at that storm, ready to basically announce if the tornado actually formed, basically on the road beside us.
Pretty wild.
Yeah, so this was like a really, really dangerous storm. Like a lot of chasers were on the storm because it was really the only big storm in that area, and it produced damage in one town. For anyone in Nebraska, it's like that might be listening. It's like near the town of Sutton and some of the other areas in that part of central Nebraska, and then it went near I-80, along I-80, and then went past Lincoln. They had a tornado warning in Lincoln, and then it went north of Lincoln and caused some wind damage in Omaha, Nebraska. And I mean, it was a nasty little storm. And yeah, that was a mean storm. So that was an eventful night.
Can I ask you a question about then? We're talking about tornadoes. Since we had one, 'em, 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 ' in your estimation, is that normal for this area where I live of the country, Western New York, or is it just something that happens freakishly? Because it was devastating to us.
Tornadoes do happen in the Northeast and New England. They don't typically they aren't typically violent. I know in Massachusetts, I know several years ago they had a tornado outbreak that was pretty violent. They had some actually a fairly violent tornado go through Massachusetts. It's usually very rare, and they have like once every couple decades or several decades they have these big events that happen up there. But so it's not infrequent just because you guys on the East Coast, you still get a lot of that Gulf of Mexico moisture that goes up there into the East Coast. Now on the West Coast, we don't get any of that because we just don't get the moisture from the Gulf of Mexico at all. Any tornadoes that we get in, say, Washington State, California, Oregon, actually a lot of those happen in the cold season where you have a lot of colder air aloft, and then you get daytime heating near the surface, and you get these sort of popcorn thunderstorms. So they call them popcorn thunderstorms. It's very shallow. Yeah, because they're very shallow thunderstorms, low top thunderstorms that pop up randomly. So they refer to them as popcorn, and because they look like that on satellite imagery, but they blow up very fast, very short-lived, but they can produce these very weak tornadoes that can just spring up out of nowhere. They can cause usually minor damage, but on rare occasions you can have a stronger tornado. They're the strongest tornado in Washington State history, killed 6 people in 1972. I believe it was 1972, April 1972, in Vancouver, Washington. But stuff like that is very rare in that part of the country. You need buoyancy, you need moisture in the low levels of the atmosphere, and to get that you have to go east of the Rockies and east of the high plains in particular. Yeah, so
we thought it was kind of strange, but
yeah.
Well, Torstein just put something up I don't want to take away from the live stream, but I'm going to just put this up really quickly.
Yeah.
U.S., UK, France will start bombing Syria, risking nuclear war with Russia and China. Great. Something must be transpiring as we are talking, but that's all I'm going to do because I have another question and we can't do a goddamn thing about it, can we? No, but we can still educate, right? Can we change it? No. The freaks in charge are truly freaks. But we're going to go here and all right, I'm going to dig into this one. Who influences you? Who are your influencing scientists? And I guess that delves into how did you get down the rabbit hole that we're in of abrupt climate change?
Well, as far as if you go back, I have to start. I think before like climate change stuff. If you going back to when I was little, just as far as science, I think first off, in questioning things. I think some of my earlier influences might be like Carl Sagan. My father was always big into science and astronomy and things like that, and so I got into Carl Sagan when I was little. He had Carl Sagan's Cosmos book, and I'd watch some of Carl Sagan's old shows and stuff like that. From I think the 70s or 80s. I know, I actually remember when Carl Sagan actually passed away in Seattle. I believe it was in 1997. He died, cancer. So I was always big into him, and the idea of just sort of seeing always questioning and seeing the world in the reality of the world as it is.
Mm-hmm.
And And as far as meteorology, it's actually quite interesting. With meteorology, a lot of times it's people you may or may not have heard of, just because meteorology is kind of a random thing. It's very specialized, and so
But it's cool.
It's a very small community. If any listeners are in Seattle, they might know the name Steve Poole. He's actually a weathercaster on KOMO TV in Seattle, ABC affiliate. I met him at 10 years old in 1994.
Wow.
Yeah,
yes, you are young if you were 10 years old in 1994.
Yeah, my parents and my elementary school principal arranged for me to meet him in Seattle. So I met him after school and got to go to the TV station and watch him do his weathercast, and talk to him, and got to go there and see everything. I still have pictures from when that happened and everything else, and so that was cool, and and stuff like that. So it's always about learning how to question things, see the natural world, understand what's happening, understand the complexity of things, and not be afraid of finding the truth, because especially with meteorology, it's and climate, there's so many variables you don't understand in things, so much chaos. You have to be ready to see, what's the words I'm looking for. You have to be ready for surprises, but willing to still have a scenario for what you think is going to happen, so people can prepare for the future. And so that's really what forecasting is, or I guess climate projection too.
Yeah.
No matter how bad
for the future. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and so, as I guess with abrupt climate change, and I think with abrupt climate change, I think I started to get in the mid 2000s, like 2014, 2015. I started to get a little bit more concerned with the way things were going with as far as what I was seeing in I think it was just like the news stories and in the general climate patterns. And I don't know if what it was, about what sort of started getting me questioning things a little bit more. Mm-hmm. But I just started to notice things, more records being, heat records being set, more, the sea ice, sheets starting to more abruptly collapse, the general temperature of the earth starting to warm faster, more news of the biosphere starting to collapse, show signs of extinction. They're actually starting to talk about extinction rates going up faster in the biosphere. I mean, what else? The acidification of the oceans, in actual, and I dig in further and learning about, the history, the past history of the past climates that had 400, parts per million carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. These details that most, average person doesn't appreciate, but a scientist appreciates.
And nerds.
Yeah, and nerds
like we are.
And so you start to realize that something doesn't seem right, and then I dig in further, and I started reading more about some of the papers of James Hansen, obviously the very famous climate scientist. And then I eventually ran into some of the research by the ice core Arctic scientist James White that actually talks about abrupt climate changes um, based on ice core research in the Arctic. And who, by the way, discovered changes in temperature, just 5 or 6 degrees Celsius, like 7, 8, 9 degrees Fahrenheit within just a few years, at least regionally, and certainly major changes globally, changes in global circulation patterns that today would be devastating. And then and he even talks about the changes we're going through today as being certainly fitting the criteria as abrupt climate change. And eventually, of course, I ran into the conservation biologist that is hasn't done so much his own peer review research on the specific topics, but has brought a lot of the information together. Guy McPherson, that obviously has his own controversy in terms of his personality and the way he talks about the topics, but he's brought a lot together.
He woke up a lot of people.
Yeah, and he woke up a lot of people. So
regardless of whatever.
Yeah, regardless.
Yeah. And so has Paul Beckwith too.
Yeah.
And you had mentioned him earlier because Paul is the teacher.
Paul Beckwith I found before McPherson because he deals with he actually does discuss some of the topics I'm interested in, which is some of the connections with extreme weather events, because one of the concerns that I increasingly have had with the discussion of climate change, and especially beginning to see the abruptness of climate change, and and we could talk more about this perhaps the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change's depiction of climate change versus what's actually happening is the issue that no one really talks about what it actually means to change the climate on real weather, because what is not the climate change matters, but it's the real weather, on the effects of real weather is what matters. Yeah. Because when you're changing a climate pattern, you're changing the maybe the fancy way of putting it, you're changing the statistical distribution of the weather patterns on that you're experiencing over the course of a year, in years, that literally your civilization, your biosphere is experiencing. So if you're shifting your climate pattern to a much hotter state, in this case, you're shifting your climate to a much more extreme state, so everything that is hotter, that only occurs, once a year, twice a year, suddenly starts occurring once a month. That's kind of a problem. And so what does that mean for growing crops? What does that mean for human health? What does that mean for the health of the plants, the animals, everything? And of course that same goes for wind. And wind, if you're talking about doing wind energy, and for example, you want to do renewable energy, well, you're accounting for renewable energy based on the climate of 1980 to 2010. Well, it's not going to be the same climate 20 years from now, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm kind of rambling, but it's kind of been an issue for me where no one truly appreciates what climate change actually means. And one of the issues I've had with meteorologists in particular is that they seem kind of a little sticklish and a little conservative with climate change. Like they just kind of want to like they say weather is not climate every time people start kind of talking about the way they notice the way the weather is changing. And it's true that weather is not climate,
right?
But it's kind of disingenuous because
weather is the result.
Weather is not climate, but increasing extreme weather events is a major symptom of climate change. It's the biggest symptom of climate change. And it's getting to the point in a speed that people that actually pay attention, particularly people that depend on it, are starting to notice, you know, and so and eventually it'll get to a point where human tipping points are met, where you get, you know, major crop failures and other issues and extinctions of species, and you know, and you may already be getting to the point where those things are happening. So,
well, we published the articles from all these different sources that are discussing these issues, but it's I want to go somewhere with you here. The Torstein, and I think we talked about this earlier. Torstein saying, Nicholas, do you believe the collapsing Gulf Stream hype, all that mini ice age in England stuff? And we were talking about AMOC, and I know that the whole conversation this week, hasn't it been about, oh, it could bring a mini, you know, ice age, and Northeast will be, I'll be under 40 feet of snow. And tell us, what do you think, dear meteorologist?
Well, I you know, based on the evidence that the scientists seem to suggest, I believe that, you know, the AMOC, you know, could reach a tipping point, or is, you know, or reaching, meaning it's crossing it now, or it's getting ready, or it's on its way towards a point of crossing it where it could collapse, where it could fail. But it's hard to say what's going to happen, because, and I know there's, I think, I'm trying to remember, there was some kind of article, it might have been a Washington Post, that mentioned the difference between this situation and the past, that a similar situation where this happened. I think it happened last time something like this happened. It was during an ice age, where you had a giant ice sheet over North America. You had a giant ice sheet over Europe. So you basically already had an ice age era going on. The AMOC, you had a warming trend start. You had melting occurring from this huge glaciation. The AMOC collapsed, and then a cooling started, and then the glaciation reinitiated. Well, we're in a completely different world, basically, what some scientists might refer to as the Anthropocene. Certainly atmospherically it is, where you have an atmosphere, you know, at 400 ppm, 400 parts per million carbon dioxide, and even more of in that, equivalent with methane and other greenhouse gases. The atmosphere hot enough to melt Greenland and Antarctica, and have like Florida and most of the Gulf Coast underwater, and, you know, and in a much like crazier world. Eventually that's going to be the case. Sorry, folks.
Maybe I do a little.
Friends in Florida, so.
Well, Judy's with us. Listen, Judy's with us. She just said she's in Florida and she's talking about this. Hi, Judy. Oh my gosh.
I was just gonna say that, but you know, it basically, it's a completely different world. So I would, you know, it's hard to know what would happen, but if you basically, what would probably happen in my mind, if I sort of model it in my mind based on what I, you know, just understand understand thermodynamically is that you will probably have, maybe mild cooling or less warming in those areas. And I think even Peter Wadhams has talked about that. You probably might have less warming in Europe, less warming in those areas, but it's still going to get hot in those areas relative to pre-industrial, and the rest of the world's, not going to change very much. So, and then on top of it, you're going to have all this meltwater coming out of Greenland and also Antarctica too. So you're going to have these very cold pools of water in the North Atlantic and then in the Southern Ocean. I know James Hansen has discussed this in a peer-reviewed paper. You could potentially have significant ocean storms that develop. He's called them superstorms because they're super compared to storms that we as humans have observed in our lifetimes in the history of civilization, basically, because we as meteorologists refer to baroclinic instability, basically horizontal instability based on temperature contrast. And you can get that temperature contrast on land, or you can get that temperature contrast over the ocean that forms as a result of temperature contrast that's relatively stable between ocean temperature contrast and sea surface temperature. And if you have very, 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 very cold water coming off of melt from Greenland and Antarctica from rapid melting because of a very warm world, and it's exponential melting, so it's melting exponentially over time, then you eventually get this very cold pool, very warm ocean surrounding it, very strong SST gradient. On top of that, on average, a very strong baroclinic gradient, and that produces an area of the North Atlantic and the Southern Ocean that has very, very turbulent, powerful superstorms that would blast that part of the ocean and obviously could threaten, potentially, Iceland, the British Isles, maybe Western Europe. There's, where these storms would go is kind of hard to say. I was discussing with a guy in one of the climate change communities. I believe he's a physicist. Or trained in physics. About where these would go, because in this kind of regime, you sea ice wouldn't exist. You'd have a blue ocean up in the Arctic in a world that's warm, but you would still have Greenland as an ice sheet that exists because the ice it's going to take many centuries to melt off completely. So you will probably have a polar vortex that exists perhaps over that region of the world, because you would not have it exist over. You will probably have a thermal low pressure that exists over the Arctic Ocean, because the Arctic Ocean is warming in that kind of regime now, because it just doesn't have a bright white ice sheet anymore over the course of a year anymore. So you might have storms that go into the Arctic instead of going towards Europe with a jet stream that is completely altered in that new type of world. But this could happen much faster than any of the IPCC models would ever depict, because we can see it now. The sea ice is collapsing much faster than any of the models are predicting. Most of the models don't predict it, realistically predict it happening. Well, yeah, Torstein, that's what Torstein is saying. It will go all the way to the Central Arctic Basin, North Pole. Yeah, Ian Baxter, I think that's his name. Hope I got your last name correct. Was thinking that too. So,
I think it's pretty scary.
Yeah,
I read.
Hopefully, most of the storms would do that, because those storms those storms, the last time those kind of storms existed on Earth was like 125,000 years ago, and they moved like blocks of rock that were the size of like small mountains. I mean, off the ocean floor. I mean, they were just like gigantic. I mean,
so comforting.
You need to read. I have to post. I forgot to post that paper on my website. Sea Level Rise and Superstorms or whatever it was called by James Hansen. It came out in 2016, I think, or 15. It's crazy. Some of the stuff that he found, it's unbelievable. Some of those extratropical storms. If you're a meteorologist, you need to read that paper. It's crazy.
Well, let's segue because there's a lot of crazy. I wanted to go because we're talking about the extreme weather. So actually, then we could segue a little bit because you were talking about what we would see. What would we actually see in, let's say, the northern hemisphere versus the southern hemisphere when the polar jet stream and those things do get more broken up, worse, less ice, potential, blue ocean event?
Excuse me.
Cough away.
Cold. Yeah, trying to get over a cold. My son brings home colds from early Head Start. It's just crazy.
I remember those days. Barely.
As far as the northern hemisphere, some of the stuff we've already talked about. I know with a blue ocean event. Well, first of all, let's define what a blue ocean event is. I think from what I've heard, as far as a blue ocean event criteria, it's generally 1 million square kilometers or less of ice extent in the Arctic, and it includes the central Arctic basin being ice free. That's like the important component of that. And there could be some ice left over in maybe in the Canadian archipelago, although I know there's been some discussion of whether even that would be possible because a lot of that might get flushed out of the Arctic. But basically what happens when you have an event like that is you end up bringing in a lot more heat into the Arctic, and that heat comes from albedo feedback and latent heat. So the albedo drops dramatically compared to what it was even in the recent past, and then there's less heat. There's just virtually no heat going into latent heat of melting. There's no heat going into melting ice, so it just goes directly into just heating the Arctic Ocean and heating the surface of the Arctic Ocean. And I know there's evidence that the Arctic Ocean with depth is already warming, and it's just the top of the Arctic Ocean that's remaining near freezing because of the sea ice that's on top. Mm-hmm. Now the peripheral seas, the Beaufort Sea and East Siberian Sea, a lot of those seas, they're already seeing seasonally this quasi blue ocean event stuff seasonally because they're getting, since the mid to late 2000s, they're getting these big retreats of sea ice that they didn't used to get every summer. But it's the Central Arctic Basin that's been held together pretty well. But this February, you started to see big cracks in the sea ice in the Central Arctic Basin in the middle of the polar night. So that was a little concerning. Yeah, that was not because of the seasonal melt. That was because of temperature of warm air advection, actual warm air coming in from the Atlantic Ocean from storms from, that were, I looked at the storms that were coming in, and they were tapping into moisture from like the Azores or something, or from I think one storm I could track the moisture source was from north of the Caribbean or something. I mean, it was just ridiculous, like really warm, moist air from the subtropics going all the way up to the, it was an atmospheric river, sort of like what you have hit California from Hawaii. You were getting atmospheric river from north, northern subtropics all the way up to the Arctic. That's going to cause cracks in the Central Arctic Basin. So
it is. It's scary, but it's true, and it's happening. And it is what it is. You're a lot younger than me. You have a longer time to be witness to this. Yeah. And how do you, as a meteorologist, and as you are in this all the way up, right, or down the rabbit hole or up into it, how do you prepare yourself for this? How do you do this? Because it's not easy to do what we do every day, just looking at all the articles and posting them. You're living in it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's difficult because, what I'm witnessing is the potential for the cut to the chase, what I'm basically witnessing is a potential for a series of events that can lead to an extinction in the biosphere. It's not just for. I'm not just talking about harming humans or harming human civilization. I'm talking about harming all the plants and animals and and oceans on the planet. And that's that's not something that's being discussed in our language of climate change on a level in media, and I don't know if it's a Western thing or if it's just a human thing in general, but it seems to be a big problem with discussing,
reality,
things that, not just reality, but fear, things that scare us. Mm-hmm. Like the other day I was on Twitter and there was some article in the Washington Post about remember I was referring to the sea level rise that was going to swamp the Gulf Coast and all that eventually. There was some article in the Washington Post about is it, I can't remember what it was called. Is it too late to to save the Mississippi Delta in Louisiana or whatever, save New Orleans or something from climate change or something like that? Mm-hmm. And I was just like, I was just thinking, and somebody that contributed to it or something was kind of like, oh, it's bad, but there's still hope. We can, we're built, there's things being done. We're new lands being built. We're able to stop this, and the person admitted that they had connections there. They've been, or they lived there or something, and we care about it. And I was just, I was just sitting there, divided, because I realized if I were somebody, who lived in that area, I'd be like, yeah, and I didn't know that necessarily know it, that there's absolutely no way to save this area. I'd be doing everything I can to stop it. On the other hand, I do know there's absolutely nothing we can do to stop this. In other words, I guess what I'm trying to say is that
to run away.
It's kind of come full circle for humans. Humans kind of have to learn. The more we advance ourselves, the more we kind of have to learn that we're not gods. All this technology, all of this, stuff that we're accumulating, and trying to, play Mr. Fix-It and do this and do that to try to, and use our brains to fix things and do this. We're not gods. We're just not smart enough. Actually, it's not even smarts. We're never going to be powerful enough to outsmart the laws of the universe. Because what's going on here, for all the abrupt changes that we're going through right now, mm-hmm. they were set in place when I was born. And I've been telling people that lately. If you go back, if you look at a lot of these scientific articles or peer review papers, and you look at a lot of the graphs that they show, like temperature graphs or acidification graphs, they all seem to start getting more abrupt around 1980, don't they? Or 1985 or 1990.
My daughter was born in 1988.
I was born in 1984. Yeah. They all seem all these abrupt changes that we're going through in 2014, 15, 16, 18. They all were written in stone. Yep. In 1980, 84, 79. In some cases, the stuff that were started in 1984 that in those graphs were probably set in stone in 1950 or 1940 or 1930. In other words, there's no way we're fast enough to anticipate everything because we can't anticipate chaos. We're nature does everything chaotically, mm-hmm. And it's a chaotic system, and we're not built to deal with chaos. We're evolved to deal with immediate threats, immediate hazards. And by the time we deal with those things, it's already too late. It was already written in stone back then. There's a latency to the system. In other words, it becomes abrupt because we're too late to figure it out.
Of what we did before. Yeah. And then when people knew, like the fossil fuel industry, Exxon, all these lawsuits are happening now, nobody told us. I am that generation that was lied to. And we were told to consume and do.
Now, it doesn't mean they didn't, like you said, it doesn't mean there wasn't an understanding of the process of climate change or how greenhouse gases work. Obviously it was known in, the greenhouse effect was known 200 years ago or whatever, 150 years ago, but the actual details of the changes or the system effects, you don't ever know exactly how it's actually going to play out until it actually happens. In many cases, even your models don't really tell you until it actually happens.
So what's going to actually happen? I just didn't know. I mean, I look around my property and I do my, YouTube walk around rants and whines on the trees and all the death and destruction and wind, because the wind that's what supposedly has caused all these problems where I am, which, it never used to be anything but in Western New York, but, we got a lot of snow.
Yeah.
And now it's ice storms and it's wind. And, like Torstein just said, though, he said, praying New York won't be nuked. I guess I am too, because I'm not ready yet to go. And
I don't.
Any number of ways we're gonna go. And Doug says, "Party to the end." Yeah, I'll tell you, we have so much stuff to worry about, but you can't every day.
Yeah,
you have to.
That's what I do. As far as climate change. As far as what's going to happen, it's kind of a weird thing. Like I know it's going to be faster than the United Nations Intergovernmental Climate Change says it's going to be, because everything that they do is based on models that don't account for like a ridiculous amount of like feedbacks that in things that are happening, but they don't put in because it's hard for it's just hard to account for them, or they just don't want to because they're politics, it's just admitted the way it is, and so so, and then in addition, as far as the as far as the biggest issue to me is, as far as climate change, isn't strictly the effects of extreme weather on people directly. I mean, like I was telling somebody like the other day, a violent tornado can kill you. Extreme heat, can kill you. And there's, some potential for extreme heat to start causing some nasty impacts. But it's the effect on food and water and the ability to shelter yourself from the extremes, because that's what humans need. We're just talking about humans for a second. You need food, you need water, and you need shelter. That's how humans have spread throughout the world, like a virus. Like some people say, like a virus, some people say like wildfire. So that's what you need. So I know Peter Carter, Dr. Peter Carter. He's discussed the issue of food. He did an excellent video last year. I posted it on my website about food on the Great Plains, and basically, when you start getting global average temperature over 2 to 3 degrees C on the Great Plains of the United States, you start getting your maximum daily temperatures during the hottest part of the year, which in the Great Plains a lot of times is obviously the month of July, typically, maybe August, but typically it's July. Certainly here in Nebraska, it's July. Mm-hmm. You start getting, temperatures significantly over that important 30 degrees Celsius, 86 degree Fahrenheit threshold. And I was rather shocked. For a lot of crops, it was 86 degrees, because it gets hot here some years and some days and some years, and I know that in a 4.5 degree world, you could be talking a combination of humidity values and temperature values in this region of the country, where you could have heat indices hitting 130 to 140 degrees Fahrenheit.
Holy crap.
But
you can't withstand that.
But at the same time, you're going to have major aridity of the soil because of high evapotranspiration. So that's the weird part about this. So, you think of moisture, and you think, oh, it'll be moist, moist soil, just be roasting the crowd. No, it's going to be like a hot, moist desert, weird desert climate here, because you're going to have all this moisture from the Gulf of Mexico, but it's going to be so hot, all the moisture is going to be starved from the soil. You just won't be able to grow anything here. People don't understand like how ridiculously like dire these kind of like places, dire, these kind of like environments are. Like because they're not described in these manners. You know, everyone keeps everything all vanilla and everything because they don't want to scare people. They don't want to, you know, and but it's like,
don't want to be called alarmists and all that. And I know I do this. I talk this.
It's just like, it's just like, it comes down to for the philosophy of truth versus stability. The leaders of the world always want stability because they always want things to go smoothly so they can be in charge because they don't want to be held responsible for screwing everything up. Because guess what? If they find out, if the common people like you and me find out that they screwed up, guess whose heads we go after? We go after them. You know,
we already know this. We already know this.
Ask the king of France what happened to his head. It's just it always happens. It's just
pitchforks.
Or a guillotine. It's just it's just always the case like that. It's just not. These are very bad things, and as far as what to do about it. And by the way, the thing you were mentioning before the show is carbon capture.
Yeah, do you think these technologies will do anything? Will go anywhere? We're going to do them anyway, like Paul says. Humans are always going to try, even if it's whatever it's going to be. And I just thought I'd pick out carbon capture because I'm reading about companies that are starting to do, manufacture these things, and I think even Tesla was making something. And so, what do you think?
Well, they better start doing it soon. Number one. Because the climate's going into a brick wall really fast, number one. And then number two, they have to figure out how to make a free lunch because that's huge amount of energy to take a trace gas that's very, trace gas that's very powerful out of the atmosphere without putting out more of that trace gas into the atmosphere. Because I assume they're going to want to do it with are you going to do it with renewable energy with wind and how are you going to do it without putting more into the atmosphere? And I don't know how it would be done to scale. You have to scale it up to a level to actually take. Or you can't have a free lunch, as they say with energy. You have to. Because I think it was like, I can't remember how much they would have to do. I think it was like, how much we pump into the atmosphere? It'd be like 40 gigatons or something like that. It's just like a huge amount of.
It's almost like assuming that we stop burning fossil fuels immediately, which the bills in Congress, even if they get looked at in the United States, the Off Fossil Fuels Act, which I fully support, and I support fully voting, and I support change and do everything we can because we're still here. And no matter what the fate is that seals for us, there are still things we can do locally, local to live well locally.
I have no problem with, just because, no matter what happens down the road, I think humans have a responsibility to act ethically toward the earth, in whatever way that we feel is ethical to us individually, whether it's to our personal, usage of resources, how we vote or whatever, we're still alive, the earth will do what it's going to do to us, ultimately, because at the end of the day, we could, get hit by a bus tomorrow, and we're going to die anyways, or you could, die of a disease. It doesn't matter whether climate change kills us or a bus kills us. We're going to, die at some point. The end that should not determine our lives. It should be, our ethical ways that determine how we live in our lives and how we deal with people. And so, we should, be able to make decisions that are ethical towards each other and the earth. So, do what we need to do. But people need to understand that the situation is far more dire than they're told, and at least understand the realities and the truth. This isn't conspiracy theory stuff. It's just a matter. I think it's more of a matter of people either being afraid or to tell fear. Fear is stigmatized, or in the case of politicians, policymakers, or in the case of oil companies, money. It's about money, or it's about power. They don't want to do things that either harm their influence or harm their power or harm their ability to make money. So there's a lot of different reasons why we don't know. Why you may be hearing things like, why didn't I know about this? Why I don't hear about this? Why, how am I hearing this from you and not from
the government?
The government. Well, government lies all the time.
From that, I'm screaming about this instead of Russia.
The government lies all the time. It's not like it's big giant news. But the information's out there, and really, if you just look even at mainstream media, you can obviously find the real stories of what's happening to the climate, to the biosphere out there. There's discussions of the sixth mass extinction out there. We talk about it all the time. Yeah, so.
They have. I've posted those articles, but the thing is, even the article that was, remember, in New York Magazine last year, the guy wrote that article that really scared the shit out of people.
The uninhabitable Earth.
Well,
whatever.
It's talking to you. Obviously, it's a more real scenario than anyone is going to tell us.
Yeah.
And so, given that this is, and you're young, what do you do for your kid? What do you do with your kid? How do we prepare our children? My daughter's 30, obviously, but what happens? How do we prepare them?
My kids is quite young, so right now I just do business as usual. And I do business as usual, so ain't really anything to prepare for. Right now, the only thing I'm trying to actually do is prepare for more, hopefully routine severe weather events. I'm trying to get the money together to put together a emergency kit for tornado season, which appears to be upon us now. We had tornado warnings in Iowa a couple hours ago. That was on the front door. So things will be ramping up pretty soon here.
But I hope they don't ramp up here, but I don't want to think about this happening again.
Yeah, I kind of have a feeling that just based on the the state of affairs that I'm seeing this spring is going to continue to be very, very, very active for tornadoes. So I'm going to make sure I'm ready for that, and also for maybe a very hot summer. So I'm trying to get ready for more extreme weather.
Do people build a lot of berm houses out there? The houses that are out partially underground. The berm houses where you are?
Not really. They have the standard, basement, and
the standard house that'll blow away. Mine. Yeah. Mine. Yeah. Blow away. And if the tornado hit my house, it probably would have. It got the roof and all, but it really got the trees. It got the trees.
Yeah.
And they had, I mean, root systems that were unbelievable. But my husband says it was because we were in a drought, that the trees were closer to the ground because they were trying to get the water, and that we have a lot of rocks in our soil. And because I've been trying to figure this all out, why are our trees so dead? And we let them falling. They just fell in the wind, like nothing. And we are losing our trees, and I feel it's horribly scary for me just to see that. But it's not fear that I'm gonna die. I mean, it's just fear for the trees and for everything around me in a way.
Yeah.
I don't know how to explain this. I'm insulated, I guess, somehow because of all of the work I do reading all this stuff. Live, like you said, business as usual. We have to business as usual. Well, let's see. Torstein says these are the good old days, and he's attributing that to Kevin. Kevin has.
Yeah.
Does anybody have any questions? Because we've been about an hour, and I know that there's a lot going on outside. We're going to all get off here and probably go on to channels that we can see what's going on. And, I have to find out and make sure that, oh, look at that. Torstein says, yeah, World War III started. Jesus. I don't want to talk about it. We're sitting here talking about the most critical subjects. And, I did actually have one more question for you. And maybe I can end it with this last question because I don't want to talk about the war. Okay. What do you think? What's destroying the environment more? Weather events, fires, tornadoes, droughts, or human destruction events, habitat loss, etc., towards the sixth extinction? If you had to weigh it, both, is it that climate?
I think right now it's habitat loss. I think it's just the humanity's takeover of the land surface, both the amount of people and it's both. A lot of people argue about population versus consumption. I don't understand why. It's both. I mean the physical presence of people, taking over. Yeah, and then but also the consumption. I get it gets so goofy. People in the United States will get mad about people in Africa having like 10 kids, and then they like drive their Hummers. Like what? Like, and they, it's like no, like I live in Nebraska, and I can't, like I drive a 99 Grand Am, and I'm parked beside somebody with like a giant truck that towers over me. I can't even see over it.
Jeez. They still drive those big ones. I mean, I drive a pickup truck, though. I do. They don't make anything real clean.
No.
I don't know if it would tower over you. Wow. Well, let's see.
So that for now. Although climate change is quickly catching up in terms of like dieback of forests from the fires that are really erupting, and and beetle attacking the forests, and maybe even these temperature extremes killing the trees, and climate change is catching up pretty quick. So
catching up the habitat destruction. There's a new person I've been sharing. He's from Brazil, and he was actually pretty interesting. His live streams on, and he had an interview with Hambone on what's going on there. That's the fourth largest country in the world, Brazil, and I'm now fascinating about it. Yeah. Well, I think we've been an hour, and I'm just going to ask out if anybody has any questions. Torstein, good night. He said he's earlier. Yeah. Any questions before we say goodbye? Because I think this has been a really great discussion, and it's an eye-opening discussion that we have to keep having. And, sometimes I am a little afraid to go all the way and say we're fucked. Excuse my language. Or just say, we're going to go and say, I don't have a time frame. I just live day by day and want to educate and wake people up so they're prepared. So they're prepared, their
Yeah.
families are prepared, and know what to do. And we have somebody wonderful. Oh, let me get in here. Wonderful here saying thank you for the great information, Nicholas. Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you, Kristen.
And thank you, Kristen, for being with us. Nicholas, you're coming back, and you know what we had talked about earlier. So we have a nice venue here, but everybody, I'm then going to Nicholas. You stay with me for a minute. We'll say goodbye to the viewers, and hopefully this will get shared out. I know we're in competition with World War III, so I don't know if we'll actually get all those views tonight. But when people, if we're not nuked tonight, and I'm still alive tomorrow, and they don't get New York City, we'll be back. Thank you, Nicholas. On that lovely note, interesting times we live in, don't we? And some people say that they're the most fascinating time to witness. I don't know, because I never was alive during any other time other than this last 59 years coming up my birthday. So thank you. You want to say a last parting goodbye?
Oh, thanks everyone for listening. Yeah, it was nice to be here.
Okay, he'll be back. Good night, everybody. Peace. And it's very relevant tonight.